Thank you to Noonie for sponsoring today's episode. What are the 7 points of story structure found in every great movie?
All right, I'm glad you asked that question. It's a funny thing. Writers, when they first started writing movies, sometimes relied on the basic structure that Aristotle pointed out for plays 2,500 years ago. There's a beginning, there's a middle, and there's an end. But movies have evolved a little bit more so that they have found a definite structure that works for just about any kind of movie. Now, there are two different kinds of structures that have been employed in movies. One is the 7-point structure, and the other is a 12-point structure. I'll go into that a little bit in a second. The 7-point structure is, first you write about ordinary life of the character, so we get to meet the character and see who that person is and see why that person needs to change, because movies are about a character going through a journey of change. The second point is the inciting incident. This is something that happens from the outside to the character and compels them to make a decision eventually, that they know they need to make a change. The third point is at the end of Act 1, when something happens to your character again, that forces him to make that decision, to have a goal and a plan. Now, we see this in every Hollywood movie, not every movie, because a movie made in France or Greece or Germany doesn't necessarily follow this. But, they're still successful in another way. Then the first part of Act 2 is your character's trying to achieve his or her goal, but there are many barriers to that goal. But at the midpoint of the movie, which is the fourth point, sometimes called the turning point, your character realizes something about himself or herself and realizes, I've got to overcome this on the inside of me. And also, maybe what I was trying to achieve, the goal I was trying to achieve, is not really what I need to do, it's what I wanted to do. Now I have to figure out what I need to do to be the person that I want to be. And so the character, the character changes or wants to change, and the action changes, and we're aiming towards a new goal. However, because 9 out of 10 times, because of the character's flaw or fault or whatever you want to call it, his character shortcomings, he or she finds himself in a position where he's never going to reach the goal. It's the low point. It looks like, and it's always about the goal. It's not somebody's mother died or he broke his leg or whatever. As long as it doesn't interfere with his goal, it's not a low point. But if it interferes with the goal, which is trying to get the need accomplished, well, that's the low point. It's the all's lost point, is sometimes called. But then something comes along, and that's the fifth point. Something comes along after that that reminds the character of what his or her goal should be. It could be just seeing a photograph of his mother. It could be his best friend saying, get off the ground and get going. You really need to do this. It could be society saying, we have to change the world and you have to be the person to do it. Whatever it is that comes along that reminds this person of what his or her goal was. And he now reinforces himself, prepares himself for the final challenge. And the final challenge is point number 6. Sometimes people call that the climax. I call it the final challenge because this is the biggest attempt to overcome whatever it was that's been preventing him from reaching his or her goal. And then he wins that final challenge because it's an American film. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be a happy ending, but he wins the challenge. Like in Gladiator, he wins the challenge, but he dies. But he does achieve his goal, which is to reunite with his family. That was the most important part of the goal. So in the 7th point is the now changed forever life of the central character. So we see him appreciate having reached the goal. Now there's another way to organize a film, and I'm not going to go through all those 12 points, but that is the mythical way, or the way that,
Joseph Campbell.
Thank you. The way that Joseph Campbell outlines it in his books. And that is used in Star Wars. It's used in Lord of the Rings. It's used in a lot of those kind of adventure movies where your character has to go through many challenges. and many different stages to reach his goal. But if you take the 7-point structure and lay it on Star Wars, or even on Wizard of Oz, which is also works on a 12-point structure, then you find that it works perfectly as well.
What is one of your favorite films where you've really dissected the 7 points?
Well, one film that works really well for the 7 points is Thelma and Louise. It's a beautifully structured film. It's a great film. Another film that works really well is In and Out. It's with Kevin Kline. It's got the most beautiful midpoint that you could ever imagine. Kevin Kline is doubting whether or not he's gay or straight by this time. And he's riding his bicycle and comes to a crossroads. What could be more, choice point? And he falls at the crossroad. He has an accident.
Right.
Falls
okay.
at the crossroads, and he has to decide which way to go. And at that crossroads, he realizes that he has to come to grips with being gay. So that's his need. His want was to get married, but his need is to realize what his sexuality really is.
I'm hoping we can clarify more about the midpoint.
Sure.
When the character goes from want to need.
Mm-hmm. This is probably the hardest point for new writers to deal with, because they don't think that they need to go from one thing to another. They just think that the character should have a goal and should be trying to achieve that goal. Now, in some movies, and I have to admit that in some movies, some action movies, there is no change. Sometimes even in a comedy, there's no change. But most of the time, somebody realizes at the midpoint that they're going down the wrong road. Or maybe that they were chasing after the treasure, but they realized that the true treasure is family. And so that is their need. So they were going for what their want was treasure, but their true treasure is the need of the family. So the midpoint is something that not only spins around that story, that is to say, the central story of the movie, but it spins around the other two stories that are going on at the same time. And that is of the personal development of your character, so that he becomes a better person or she becomes a better person. And then there's another story that is in every good movie, and that is the central emotional relationship story. So sometimes called the love interest. So if somebody is pursuing somebody or trying to fix or create a relationship with somebody, at the midpoint, they realize they've been going at that in the wrong way, and they need to make some changes in order for that to happen. So the midpoint is something that if a writer hasn't worked it out before they sit down and write it, they're going to have some trouble. But if they get to that point and they realize that they're in the wrong place or they don't know where to go next, that's when they have to figure out what the real need of that character is.
How does the 7 points factor into your writing process?
Well, that's an interesting question, because what I usually think of when I'm writing, most times I come up with a character, but I know I have to figure out what is the character's issue. And then I stop and think, well, if he's got this issue, how is he going to deal with that issue? And that's when I start to write the 7 points, because I think that comes before writing almost anything else. I usually write the very short bios of the characters that I have in mind, only 3 or 4 sentences, the physiology, the psychology, the sociology of the character. But then I figure out, well, what is the character doing now? What's the character's flaw? Because that's the most important driving point of the character. What is the character's flaw? What is he going to have to do to overcome that flaw? Why does he have to overcome that flaw to achieve his or her goal? So I figure out what is the character's ordinary life. And I just write that in 1 or 2 sentences. Then I figure out, well, what's going to make him change? What's going to happen from the outside that's going to make him change? And then I write that point. And then I figure out, well, what's he going to do about that? And that's the goal and the plan. And then I figure out, well, what's going to make him turn around at the midpoint to realize what's really going on, what he really needs to do. And so I write 1 or 2 sentences about that. And then I figure out, well, how does he screw up? And And how does that bring him down and make a low point for him? And then I figure out, how does he bring himself back up and face the final challenge? And I write a couple of sentences about that, what that final challenge might look like. And then I figure out, well, how's it going to be after that? What's his life going to be as a normal person again? Or is now changed forever normal life? And then the process follows after that. Then I generally like, if I haven't already written bios for everybody, I do usually a full-page bio for each central character. That would be the protagonist. The antagonist also deserves a bio, and the central emotional relationship, and anybody else that is important, maybe a catalyst of some sort. I write those bios, then I write a beat sheet, and I stop and figure out, with the 7 points in mind, what are the beats that lead from each point to the next point.
I think you've said too that the physiology, the sociology, and the psychology is very important in that it's also based on how other people perceive that character,
right.
And then that person reacts based on that. I thought that was fascinating.
That's correct.
I heard you talk about that.
Yeah. This is not something that I invented. Lajos Egri, the Hungarian theater critic, wrote in Art of Dramatic Writing that these are the ways that you construct a character. He said, character is the most important thing to know when you're writing a play. And I think that's the most important thing to know when you're writing a film as well. And that's why the flaw is so important. That's why the physiology of the character, because a character, let's say a character is my height, but weighs 300 pounds. You have a different way of looking at the world when you're like that. Let's say the character is 4 feet tall. You have a different way of looking at the world. If you're 7 feet tall, you have a different way of looking at the world. And the world looks at you in a different way. So you have to act accordingly. And so you have to direct your character according to that. And then there's the sociology of the character, where he or she was born, where they learned their language, what language did they learn, how many languages did they speak, what their family was like. Was it a mother and a father and 2 children, or was it a father and a father and 3 children? Was it a mother and a mother? Was it just the mother, just the father? Was it the grandparents? Knowing that kind of background is important for your character. Knowing where they went to school, what they learned in school, what they studied after school, and what kind of occupations they've had, what kind of jobs they've had, where they live now, where they lived before. All those things are the sociology of the character. And then there's the psychology of the character. Is this person a happy person by nature? A sad person, a depressed person, doesn't care person, doesn't even think about it? Is it a stoner? Is it not a stoner? Is it an alcoholic? All those things are very important in developing the character. So you see, if you write bios and you use those 3 guidelines to write a bio, you'll know who your character is. And knowing who your character is helps you write the story, but also helps you write the dialogue. Because if you know how your character thinks, because of his background, his physiology, his sociology, his psychology, then you'll know what he's going to say. And if you know what he's going to say, you don't have to struggle over dialogue. It'll come to you. The character will speak through you. And that is a great moment when that happens.
And lastly, you said something fascinating that I wonder if it lent to your time working at the community college, in that if they come from an immigrant family, was it a traditional sort of upbringing, or did they stray from that?
Right.
Does that would have implications as well?
A huge implication. Yeah, I've worked with hundreds, actually thousands of immigrants at Long Beach Community College, and in other places as well. I'm a fluent Spanish speaker, so that in Los Angeles, I've worked with a lot of people from other countries. And I understand some people came to this country as a part of a rebellion from their traditional upbringing. Some people came to this country because they had to, because of economics or family issues or prosecution or whatever it was. All those things have a great effect on the character. And if you're cognizant of those, if you create a character with that many conflicts and those kind of issues, then you create an interesting character. You don't want to have a completely white bread character. That's not interesting at all.